The dinner shift started like any other night. The restaurant was quiet but expensive, the kind of place where the lights were soft and the chairs were heavy. Everything smelled clean and polished. Outside the tall windows, the city moved fast, but inside, time felt slow and careful. The waitress adjusted her apron and checked her notepad. She had been working here for over a year, long enough to know the regular guests, long enough to know which tables liked silence and which ones liked attention. She was not new, but she was never careless. Every step, every smile, every word mattered in a place like this. Tonight, one private table had already drawn attention. 5 men in tailored suits sat together near the back, where the noise from the kitchen could not reach them. They spoke quietly, leaning in, their voices calm and confident. This was not a casual dinner. This was business. The manager had pointed them out earlier and reminded the staff to be discreet. No interruptions, no hovering, just service clean and smooth. The waitress nodded, as she always did. She approached the table with water and menus. The men barely looked up. One of them gave a short nod. Another continued speaking without pause. She placed the glasses down carefully and stepped away, already forgotten. That was normal. People like this did not notice servers unless something went wrong. As she moved to another table, their voices followed her faintly. Numbers floated through the air. Percentages. Dates. Nothing unusual. She had heard enough meetings to know the sound of big money conversations. She never listened closely. It was not her business. She focused on her work. Orders came in. Plates went out. Wine was poured. The evening moved forward. When she returned to the private table to refill water, the conversation had grown more focused. Papers were spread across the table. One man tapped a pen against a document. Another leaned back, confident, almost relaxed. She reached forward to pour water. That was when she heard it. A single sentence, said casually, said with certainty. The number didn't feel right. She froze for half a second, just long enough to notice the feeling in her chest. Tightness, a quiet alarm. She finished pouring and stepped away, her face calm, her hands steady, but her mind stayed behind. She told herself she must have misheard. That happens. Numbers sound similar. It was loud. She was tired, but the sentence repeated itself in her head. Later, as she passed again with a tray of drinks, the same number came up. Same figure. Same assumption. This time she was sure. Something was wrong. She did not stop. She did not stare. She moved like she always did. But inside, her thoughts began to race. She had not always been a waitress. Before this job, her life had looked very different. She had studied. She had worked in offices where people spoke the same language these men were using now. She understood reports, timelines, projections. She had left that life for reasons she rarely explained. Life had turned. Responsibilities had changed. Still, knowledge does not disappear. The more she heard, the clearer it became. They were discussing a deal built on information that no longer applied. An old figure. An assumption that had been updated months ago. It wasn't a small detail. It wasn't something that could be fixed later. It was the foundation. Her heart beat faster as she stepped into the service area. She leaned against the counter for a moment and took a breath. The kitchen noise felt louder than usual. Plates clattered. Someone laughed. She stared at her hands. If she was right, the mistake was massive. If she was wrong, she would embarrass herself at best. Lose her job at worst. She reminded herself of the rules. Staff do not interrupt guests. Staff do not offer opinions. Staff do not insert themselves into private matters. She returned to the floor. The men ordered more drinks. Their confidence grew as the evening moved on. One of them mentioned how smooth the meeting had been. Another joked about celebrating once the paperwork was done. They sounded satisfied. That scared her more. She cleared plates from a nearby table and listened without meaning to. The details lined up too well. The error stayed consistent. No one questioned it. She thought about the people not in the room. Employees, investors, families who would feel the impact if this deal collapsed later. Her shift had always been about small choices. When to refill, when to step back. Tonight felt different. As she approached the table again, one man spoke louder than the others. He said the meeting would wrap up soon. Everything was ready. Final numbers confirmed. That was it. Her chance, if there ever was one, was closing. She stood there with the water pitcher, her hands steady but her mind loud. She could walk away and forget what she heard. No one would blame her. It was not her responsibility. But responsibility does not always ask permission. She took a step back, then another. Her feet felt heavy. Her chest felt tight. She told herself she would think about it after the shift, that someone else would catch it. Still, a quiet voice inside her asked a simple question. What if no one does? The meeting continued. Laughter returned. Chairs shifted. And the waitress kept moving, carrying more than plates, carrying a decision she was not ready to make yet. The night was far from over. The waitress kept her distance, but her mind was already replaying the words she had overheard. Numbers, dates, assumptions, each one sounded wrong. Her experience, something she rarely drew on these days, suddenly became the lens through which she saw everything around her. She had worked in offices, studied charts, double-checked figures, and spoken up when things didn't make sense. That part of her life had seemed far away, but now it felt alive again, pressing her to notice what no one else did. As she moved between tables, she quietly observed the executives. They spoke with confidence, their body language casual yet assured. None of them paused to check their documents carefully. None of them questioned the numbers. They were so certain that the deal was solid. That certainty made the mistake even more dangerous. She remembered the conversation from earlier. A single sentence had clued her in. She had heard them say a figure, a projection, something tied to a $50 million transaction. That number repeated itself over and over, and she realized that it was based on outdated data. If the deal went forward, people would lose money. Projects could collapse. Jobs might disappear. Families might suffer. And it could all be prevented if someone noticed in time. She continued serving drinks, moving between tables with calm professionalism, but her thoughts kept returning to that number. She pictured the documents, the spreadsheets, and the calculations, mentally checking each detail against what she remembered. It all lined up. The deal, as they planned it, was a mistake. It was not a small error. It was something that could not be ignored. Her mind raced with questions. Should she speak up? How could she? She was just a waitress. She had no title, no authority, no invitation to participate in a meeting like this. But she also understood that no one else in the room seemed to realize the error. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the responsibility had fallen on her, whether she wanted it or not. The restaurant was alive with quiet clinks of silverware, low conversations, and the soft hum of the city outside. Everything seemed normal, but inside the room where the meeting took place, the potential for disaster lingered. The executives laughed over a shared joke, leaned back in their chairs, and congratulated themselves on a deal they had not yet confirmed. They were unaware of the error that threatened the foundation of their plans. She took another tray of water, placing it gently on a nearby table. She could hear snippets of conversation, the way they referenced approvals and financial models. The more she listened, the more certain she became. She knew exactly where the mistake was and what it could mean if left unaddressed. She also knew that no one else in the room had the knowledge to catch it. If the deal went forward without correction, the consequences would be immediate and severe. Her thoughts flicked to her own life. She had never imagined being in this position, standing in the middle of a restaurant and overhearing a $50 million error. It seemed surreal, like something from a story she would have read as a child. Yet here she was, aware of something that could affect people she had never met, people who were trusting these executives to get it right. She could not turn away. She could not act as though she had not heard it. She tried to calm herself, repeating the rules she had followed for years. Do your job, serve the tables, smile, stay invisible. But the knowledge gnawed at her. It was not about etiquette or discretion anymore. It was about right and wrong. She could not ignore what she knew. The men continued speaking, oblivious to the risk. One of them outlined the timeline for approval, another discussed signatures and signatures pending from different parties. They sounded confident, almost relieved. They believed everything was in order. That belief made her stomach tighten. Mistakes grow when unchecked, and she could not let this one grow. She moved back to the private table under the pretense of checking on something else. Her tray balanced carefully in her hands, but her mind was focused on the numbers, the dates, the potential consequences. She realized that the conversation had veered into a critical point, where final decisions were about to be made. If she waited any longer, her opportunity to intervene might vanish. The risk of speaking up weighed heavily on her. What if she was wrong? What if they laughed, dismissed her, or worse, fired her? She had seen people punished for less. She reminded herself that she was only an observer here, that her role was to serve, not to intervene. Yet the voice inside her insisted otherwise. It whispered that responsibility could not be ignored when lives and livelihoods were at stake. She remembered the times in her previous life when she had noticed mistakes. She had always spoken up then, carefully and respectfully. Most of the time, she was right. Most of the time, the intervention had made a difference. And the regret of staying silent had always haunted her. She did not want to face that regret tonight. As she returned to the service area for a moment, she leaned against the counter, trying to gather her thoughts. The clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation, and the soft music filled her ears, but her mind focused on the task ahead. She thought about how to approach it. How could she insert herself politely into a private discussion without causing a scene or getting dismissed? How could she present the information in a way that would make them stop and listen? The moments passed slowly. She watched as the men finalized their plans, oblivious to the error. She imagined the impact if the mistake were ignored. Projects falling apart, employees losing their positions, financial losses multiplying. Her heart pounded with urgency. She reminded herself to stay calm, speak clearly, be respectful, avoid confrontation, focus on the facts. That was the only way she could hope to be heard. And yet doubt lingered. Would they listen to a waitress? Would they take her seriously? Could one voice truly make a difference in a room full of authority and confidence? She realized that she had no choice. If she did nothing, the consequences would be far greater than her fear. The responsibility of knowledge had fallen on her shoulders, and she had to act. It was no longer just a matter of serving tables. It was a matter of preventing disaster. The meeting moved forward, the executives joking and congratulating themselves, unaware that the very foundation of their decisions was flawed. Time was running out. She felt the urgency pressing against her, urging her to step forward, to speak, to act. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She reminded herself of all the times she had spoken up in the past, of the times it had made a difference. She reminded herself that silence would not save anyone, that it would only allow the mistake to grow unchecked. Her feet carried her back toward the table, her hands steady despite the tension she felt inside. She could not delay any longer. The moment to act had arrived. She had to find a way to speak, to alert them to the error, to give them a chance to correct it before it was too late. The room seemed to quiet around her. The sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. All that mattered was the knowledge she carried, the decision she had to make, and the potential to prevent a disaster. The waitress knew that what she did next could change everything. The waitress walked slowly back to the private table, each step deliberate, each movement controlled. Her tray balanced in her hands, but it felt heavier than usual. It was not just the glasses or the water. It was the weight of what she knew. The knowledge that a mistake was about to become reality. The mistake that could change lives and ruin plans. And she was the only one who could stop it. She paused for a moment behind a chair, pretending to adjust the tray. Her mind raced, going over everything she had heard. The figure, the timeline, the approvals, all lined up in her memory. She could see the spreadsheets in her mind, the calculations she had learned to read years ago. They had overlooked one detail, one number, one line in a table, and that small error could grow into a $50 million disaster. The men were still talking, still confident, still oblivious. One of them laughed at a joke, Another leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the day's work. They had no idea that the foundation of their discussion was flawed. They believed they were in control, that everything was correct, that the deal was sound. That made it even more dangerous. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. She had to speak. She had to act. But how could she do it without embarrassing herself or being dismissed? She was just a waitress, a face in the background, a person meant to serve food and drinks, not challenge executives. But the knowledge she carried demanded action. It was not about her job or her status anymore. It was about doing the right thing. As she stepped closer, her heart beat faster. Fear tried to take hold, but she pushed it aside. Fear had never saved anyone. Silence had never saved anyone. Only action, careful and deliberate, could prevent disaster. She remembered times in her life when she had spoken up, and times when she had remained silent. The regret of silence was always heavier than the fear of speaking. The tray felt heavier, the room seemed smaller, the sounds louder. She could hear every detail of their conversation now. The approvals, the signatures, the steps to finalize the deal. They were moving quickly, unaware that their entire plan was based on the wrong numbers. She imagined the consequences. Employees who depended on this deal could lose their jobs. Families could be affected. Investments could vanish. And all of it could have been avoided. Her mind went back to the first sentence she had overheard. It had seemed harmless at first. Just a number. Just a figure. But it had echoed in her mind, growing louder with every repetition. She had tried to dismiss it, to convince herself it was not her concern. But it had refused to be ignored. And now it demanded attention. She took another breath, steadying herself. She reminded herself of the rules she had always followed. Speak politely. Stay calm. Focus on the facts. Avoid confrontation. Do not accuse. Do not alarm. Just present the information clearly and simply. That was the only way she could hope to be heard. The men continued talking, unaware of the tension building in her chest. They referenced approvals, documents, and timelines, all based on the figure she knew was wrong. One of them mentioned celebrating once the paperwork was completed. The thought made her stomach twist. They had no idea how close they were to disaster. She realized that waiting any longer could make it too late. The opportunity to intervene was slipping away with each passing moment. She had to find a way to insert herself into the conversation without causing a scene, without being dismissed, without risking ridicule. It was not easy, but she had done difficult things before. Her feet moved closer to the table. Her hands remained steady, her face calm, her voice ready to speak. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She reminded herself that she was not here to argue or challenge. She was here to provide information, to give them a chance to correct an error before it became irreversible. As she approached, one of the men looked up briefly, acknowledging her presence. She smiled politely, nodded, and prepared to speak. The words formed in her mind carefully, tested and retested. She had to be precise. She had to be clear. She had to be respectful. Everything depended on how she delivered the message. The room seemed to quiet around her. The sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. All that mattered was the knowledge she carried, the decision she had to make, and the opportunity to prevent disaster. Her voice, calm but firm, finally broke the silence. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with precision. She pointed out the specific figure, the timeline, and the outdated information. She explained, without accusation or judgment, why the number was incorrect. She suggested checking the documents again, just to be sure. Her voice was steady, her tone respectful, her presence non-threatening. For a moment there was silence. The men froze, their expressions shifting from confidence to confusion. The realization slowly began to dawn on them. The error was real. The mistake was not small. The consequences could be significant. One of the executives picked up a document, scanning it quickly. Another pulled out a phone, calling someone to verify. The room that had been filled with laughter and casual confidence now held tension and disbelief. The truth was undeniable. The waitress stepped back, giving them space, her heart still racing. She had done what she could. The responsibility now rested with them. She watched as they corrected the error, double-checked the numbers, and adjusted their plans. The meeting that had been moving toward a disastrous conclusion was now on a different path. The men thanked her quietly, some still in shock that they had overlooked such a critical detail. Her heart settled slightly, the tension easing as she realized the impact of her action. She had spoken up and it had made a difference. Lives, plans, and investments could now be saved. She returned to her duties, carrying plates and refilling glasses, but her mind replayed the moment over and over. The fear, the decision, the courage it took to speak. It all felt surreal. She knew that she had changed the course of events that night. She also knew that the weight of responsibility had been hers alone, at least for a moment. As the evening continued, she moved between tables, polite and professional, but aware of the quiet power of her actions. She had seen the impact of a single voice, calm and knowledgeable, on people who had believed themselves untouchable. She had witnessed how the right words, delivered with respect and clarity, could stop disaster in its tracks. Her shift ended, and she stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered, the sounds of traffic and life surrounding her. She took a deep breath, feeling the relief, the exhaustion, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had acted when it mattered most. The mistake had been caught. The meeting had been saved. And one quiet waitress had made all the difference. The moment she spoke, a silence filled the room. The clinking of glasses, the low murmur of conversation, and the distant hum of the restaurant all seemed to fade away. The men at the table froze, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and confusion. They had not expected a waitress to interject into their meeting. They had not expected anyone to notice the mistake. She remained calm, keeping her hands steady on the tray. Her voice was soft but clear as she explained what she had overheard. She carefully outlined the incorrect figure, the outdated information, and the potential consequences if it was not corrected. She did not accuse anyone. She did not suggest incompetence. She simply presented the facts, letting the information speak for itself. At first, there was disbelief. One executive blinked rapidly, staring at the papers in front of him. Another leaned forward, squinting at the numbers, as though trying to convince himself that what he had heard could not be true. The room was tense, the energy shifting from casual confidence to urgent focus. The waitress continued, suggesting that they check the latest documents, just to make sure everything was accurate. She spoke politely, with respect, but with a quiet firmness. She did not hesitate. She did not apologize for speaking. She had made her point, and now it was up to them to respond. The executives whispered to each other, their voices low and urgent. One picked up a phone, calling someone to verify the figures. Another scanned the spreadsheet again, double-checking every line, every total. The realization began to sink in. The mistake was real. The error was significant. The $50 million figure they had been working with was incorrect. The tension in the room was palpable. The men had been so confident moments ago, certain that everything was in order. Now that certainty was gone, replaced by disbelief and concern. They leaned over the documents, muttering numbers, comparing figures, trying to understand how they had missed something so critical. The waitress stood quietly to the side, watching as the scene unfolded. She felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that she had spoken up. Anxiety over how the men would react to her. She had crossed a boundary, entering a space where she did not belong. Yet the information she had shared was undeniable. Could not be ignored. One of the executives finally looked up, his expression serious. He nodded to the others, and they all began to talk more openly, checking details and recalculating figures. The room was alive with the sound of rapid discussion, voices overlapping, pens scratching, phones tapping. The error that had threatened to go unnoticed was now at the center of attention. Slowly, the men realized the gravity of the mistake. The timelines, the approvals, the projections, all of it needed adjustment. One of them muttered about the potential fallout if the error had not been caught. Another expressed gratitude for the correction, though they were still processing the shock of how it had been missed. The waitress remained calm, her role now almost invisible. She had made the point. She had provided the critical information. The rest was up to the executives. She felt the tension ease slightly as they began to correct their plans, adjusting timelines and recalculating figures. The immediate danger had passed, and the meeting was redirected onto a safer path. As the executives worked, she realized how powerful a single voice could be. She had not shouted. She had not demanded attention. She had simply presented the truth, and it had made all the difference. It was a quiet victory, one that would not be celebrated publicly, but it mattered nonetheless. The men gradually returned to a calmer state, their initial shock replaced by focus and determination. They reviewed the documents carefully, made calls to confirm details, and began to outline new steps to correct the error. The energy in the room shifted once again, from panic to problem-solving. The meeting that had been on the brink of disaster was now on track, thanks to the intervention of the quiet waitress who had noticed what no one else did. Finally, one of the executives looked up and nodded toward her. He spoke softly, almost to himself, acknowledging the importance of what she had done. The others followed suit, offering thanks and expressing relief that the mistake had been caught before it was too late. They were still processing the shock, but they recognized the impact of her actions. The waitress smiled politely, her heart still racing, but she did not speak further. Her job was to serve, not to participate in the meeting. She had done what was necessary. The correction was in motion. The deal, once built on an error, was now being properly adjusted. She returned to her duties, moving between tables, her movements fluid and professional. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and attended to other guests, but her mind lingered on the table in the back. The room that had been filled with confidence and casual chatter had transformed into a space of focus and problem-solving. She had witnessed firsthand how quickly a situation could change when the truth was brought to light. As the night progressed, she noticed the executives wrapping up the meeting, papers organized, phones down, and plans adjusted. The tension had eased, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and relief. They packed up their materials, thanked the staff, and left quietly, leaving behind only the faint hum of conversation and the lingering sense of what had just occurred. The waitress took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the evening settle on her shoulders. She had intervened when it mattered most. She had spoken up when no one else would. She had helped prevent a potentially disastrous outcome. The knowledge that she had made a difference was both humbling and empowering. She moved through the restaurant, finishing her shift with the same care and professionalism as always. Every step, every action, carried the quiet pride of knowing that she had acted with integrity and courage. She had witnessed the power of speaking the truth, even from a place where no one expected it, and she had seen how one voice could change the course of events. When the shift finally ended, she stepped outside into the night. The city lights sparkled, the sounds of traffic and distant voices filled the air, and the cool breeze touched her face. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The meeting had been redirected, the error corrected, and the consequences averted. All because she had noticed something others had overlooked and had the courage to speak. Walking home, she thought about the events of the evening. She reflected on the fear, the hesitation, and the decision to act. She realized that true courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was simply noticing a mistake and having the willingness to speak up, no matter the risk. The waitress knew that the impact of her actions would not be celebrated publicly, and that was fine. The satisfaction came from knowing that she had done the right thing. She had prevented a mistake from causing harm. She had made a difference when it mattered most. And that knowledge, quiet but powerful, would stay with her long after the restaurant lights dimmed and the night grew still. The next morning, the waitress arrived at work with a sense of quiet reflection. The events of the previous night still lingered in her mind. She had done something she never imagined she would do. She had spoken up in a room filled with power and authority, a room where her voice should not have mattered. Yet it had mattered. It had changed the outcome of a deal that could have had disastrous consequences. The thought filled her with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She moved through her morning routine with the usual care and precision, greeting colleagues, checking orders, and preparing the restaurant for the day. Everything felt ordinary, but in her mind, nothing was ordinary anymore. The awareness that one action could create such impact had shifted something inside her. It was not about recognition or reward. It was about the knowledge that she could make a difference when it mattered. As the day progressed, she noticed subtle changes in the restaurant. A few of the staff mentioned seeing executives leave with unusually serious expressions, their demeanor different from the casual confidence of the previous night. Some whispered that the meeting had been interrupted, that a critical error had been discovered. But no one mentioned her. She knew she had been the catalyst, but that did not matter. The truth of her action existed in the knowledge that things were set right. During a quiet moment, she paused to think about the sequence of events. How easy it could have been to walk away, to dismiss the words she had overheard as irrelevant. How easy it would have been to let fear control her actions. But she had not. She had chosen to act. The courage had been quiet, almost imperceptible, but it had been enough. Her mind wandered to the executives themselves. She wondered how they felt in the aftermath, having realized the mistake and corrected it. She imagined the relief, the gratitude, and perhaps even the humility that came from acknowledging that a mistake had been caught by someone they had not expected. She smiled at the thought. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected sources. The lunch rush arrived, and she moved through the restaurant with calm efficiency. Plates were cleared, orders were taken, and guests were attended to. The rhythm of the work grounded her, allowing her mind to process the previous night in fragments. She thought about how often people hesitate to speak up, fearing consequences, fearing judgment, fearing rejection. She had faced all of those fears and had acted anyway. The memory of the fear, quickly followed by the clarity of purpose, remained vivid. During a brief pause, she looked out the window at the city streets below. Life moved on, indifferent to the events in the restaurant the night before. Cars passed, pedestrians hurried, lights flickered, and yet, she felt a quiet connection to the larger world. Her action, small in the scale of the city, had altered the course of something significant. It reminded her that even in a world of noise and distraction, individual choices still carried weight. As the day wore on, she thought about the concept of responsibility. How often it is assumed by those in positions of power that others will catch mistakes, that someone else will act, that errors will go unnoticed. She realized how easy it is for problems to escalate when no one takes ownership. And she understood that responsibility is not always linked to position or title. Sometimes it falls unexpectedly, into the hands of someone who might never have expected it. The memory of the meeting, the tense moment when she had spoken, and the executive's reactions stayed with her. She had been careful, respectful, and clear. That had been enough. It was not about authority or hierarchy. It was about clarity and truth. The executives had recognized that immediately. They had acted on the information without hesitation, redirecting the deal before damage could occur. She continued her work, moving from table to table, engaging with guests with the same professionalism as always. But beneath the surface, a quiet confidence had taken root. She knew now that her voice could matter, that her awareness and action could prevent harm and create positive change. It was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Later in the afternoon, the manager approached her briefly. He mentioned that the executives had left a note of thanks with a senior staff member, acknowledging that the meeting had been redirected thanks to an observant and careful staff member. The waitress did not seek recognition, but hearing the acknowledgement brought a warm feeling. Her actions had been noticed, even if indirectly, and that validation, small as it was, felt meaningful. She reflected on how easily one could dismiss responsibility when it does not seem to belong to them. How often people assume that errors will be caught by someone else. She realized that courage is often quiet, uncelebrated, and subtle. It does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it is a quiet decision to act, to speak, to intervene, and to insist on clarity. That is what she had done, and that was what mattered. The evening approached, and the restaurant began to quiet down. Tables emptied, chairs were pushed back, and the staff moved with practiced efficiency to prepare for closing. She walked through the space, observing the calm that contrasted with the tension of the previous night. The executives were gone, the meeting resolved, and the potential disaster averted. She thought about the lesson she had learned. That knowledge and awareness carry responsibility. That even when no one expects it, action can change outcomes. That fear, while powerful, does not need to dictate choices. Courage, she realized, is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, precise, and grounded in integrity. As she left the restaurant and stepped into the night, the city lights shimmered, reflecting off the wet pavement from a recent rain. The air was cool, carrying the sounds of distant traffic and the occasional conversation from the streets below. She walked slowly, feeling the weight of the evening and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done the right thing. She thought about how the world often overlooks the small actions of individuals, the unnoticed interventions that prevent harm. Yet, she understood that these actions mattered profoundly. A single choice made carefully and courageously had changed the outcome of an important decision. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a reminder that one voice, spoken at the right moment, could alter the course of events. The waitress realized that her life had shifted subtly but permanently. She had been reminded that awareness and action are powerful, that responsibility does not always follow rank or status, that integrity and courage are often quiet, but their impact can be vast. She felt grateful for the opportunity to act, even if the recognition would be small or indirect. The satisfaction came from knowing that she had prevented a mistake, that she had influenced events for the better, and that she had trusted herself to act. Walking home, she carried with her the sense of accomplishment and reflection. She understood that her decision to speak up had mattered more than she had imagined. She had seen firsthand the ripple effect of clarity and truth, and she had experienced the quiet power of courage. The evening had ended, the mistake had been corrected, and the world continued its course, subtly altered by her awareness and action. As she arrived at her apartment, she paused for a moment to look out at the city skyline. The lights glimmered, 1,000 small stories unfolding, each with its own challenges, decisions, and consequences. She thought about her place in that world, the role of observation, and the importance of action. She realized that the events of the night before had changed her, had strengthened her understanding of responsibility and courage, and had left her with a quiet but enduring sense of confidence. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, feeling the satisfaction of having done what was right. The restaurant, the meeting, the executives, and the error, they were all part of a story she would carry with her, a story of awareness, courage, and the quiet power of action. She knew that life would continue, full of challenges and choices, and she also knew that she could face them with the confidence of someone who had spoken up when it mattered most. The night had ended, but the lesson would remain, a quiet reminder of the difference one person can make.